Welcome back to the First Gnostic Church of Christ. We are now on video number 10. We are picking up on the section from the Gospel of Philip titled Adam's Soul. We left off in our last video discussing the union in the bridal chamber. The union in the bridal chamber refers to the male and female parts of each of us that unite spiritually. And this is done through a marriage ceremony that is done by accepting the Christ through Gnosis and the Sophia through wisdom, and marrying these two, the kingdom of God within. Then we make a vow to commit ourselves in this marriage, or this merging with the Spirit of God, to live our lives out, to become a Christ. This is the purpose behind the union in the bridal chamber. We consummate our marriage, we go to the bridal chamber, we have a type of spiritual intercourse with the Christ and the Sophia, these two coming together in union and bringing forth our fullness through the course of our life. The way in which we carry this out is to continually follow the ways of Christ and the ways of Sophia, and we're going to understand the ways of Sophia through the wisdom that speaks in the universe. And that wisdom is also found in the canonical text as well as the Gnostic text. This idea of the union between the male and the female is the cornerstone of our understanding of fullness and how we arrive to fullness. We don't have a preconceived notion about what it means to be man, what it means to be woman, but we merely allow ourselves to be what we are. For whatever we are was intended from the beginning, from the mother father, emanated from the Pleroma into this realm, the dark realm. We only need to remember, recall, redeem ourselves back to that understanding. And this redeeming is like bringing in a coupon to a restaurant and getting what was always free offered to you and exchanging that coupon for the free meal. In this case, the free meal being the father, mother offers you life eternal, offers you the knowledge of good and evil so that you may transcend the tree or this realm of division, left and right, male and female, and find fullness and completion. And whatever the amalgamation that you are, whatever your makeup is, that is how you were intended to be from the beginning. This is what we each must learn to accept. And as we do that, we heal. And that healing emanates outward and heals others. As we all heal, we find not only our fullness within each of ourselves, but outwardly in the universe at large, within society, in groups and societies and nations and the human race, a healing process and unity that's found through unity. This is what we have to understand before we move on to understand this next section called Adam's soul. Here it says Adam's soul came from a breath, and that's the breath of life. The demiurge was encouraged to breathe into the lifeless form that he had created of the Hebrew race, the Adam race, the race from the soil, the red soil. He had breathed in his gnosis into Adam, which is Sophia, through this breath. The soul's companion is spirit. So the soul's companion is the Spirit of God, which is the Mother Father. That's the pronoia, the protonoia, the epinoia, that's constantly working, thrice male, through the Christ being revealed. That's the Spirit. That's the Holy Spirit. And the Spirit given to him is his mother. And that Spirit also was working not only in the Christ, but also in the Sophia, who is our mother. And the mother of all mothers is Barbella, which is the mother of Sophia. His soul was taken from him, meaning from Adam, and replaced with spirit. This soul that was taken from Adam and replaced with spirit was the original artificial spirit given to him by the demiurge. And by the Christ coming to earth, he came in the form of gnosis through the serpent and Adam, and offered to Adam and Eve this gnosis. And he also came in the form of an eagle, which was the Sophia of wisdom, which is the scorpion archetype. And by so doing this, he brought the knowledge of good and evil, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, to Adam and Eve. And the gnosis came on, and it superseded, being led by the soul. When he was united with spirit, he uttered words superior to the powers. And the powers is the demiurge and his minions, Jehovah and all of his angels and the demons. And those powers envied him. So they went about to take the spirit from him. So they separated him from his spiritual companion, hidden bridal chamber. Now we don't know all the words here. A lot of words are missing here. But essentially, what I'm getting from this is that by taking out from Adam Eve, creating Eve, he had taken out the wisdom, his spiritual companion. Now, who is Jehovah exactly? Now, in Gnosticism, we have many different understandings of who Jehovah is, just as in Proto-Orthodox Christianity. Proto-Orthodox Christianity will often argue that Jehovah is Christ and Christ is Jehovah. Some will say, no, Jehovah is God and Jesus is Son of God, and they're not the same. Within Gnosticism, we have the belief that Jehovah is the demiurge. He's one face of the demiurge. He is through the tetragrammaton. That's the elements, the four elements. He's the expression of the four elements working here on earth to move man, whether it's through light in a cloud being followed around by the Ark of the Covenant, waters that are parting for Noah, locusts that are being moved by the Spirit to present plague. This is the Jehovah. And constantly with the Israelites, the Hebrew race, because that is their God, you see. There's also some within Gnosticism that will consider that Jehovah is a body of angels, and the head angel is Jehovah, an archangel. That isn't the demiurge, but is part of the demiurge. It's one of the more high-ranking angels, perhaps a seraphim. And you had seraphim within the race of seraphim that rebelled, and that came in the form of the snake and the eagle. Well, the snake in this case, the seraphim, which we get the word serpent from. And then others will say that no, in fact, it is that Jehovah is a supreme alien being from another planet and has come here to rule over humanity along with the minions or their commanders and so forth. And what you have in Genesis chapter 2 is a retelling of the manipulation of the DNA, the sequence of the DNA within humankind. So you have these alien beings coming down, the captain, of course, being Jehovah, and this is the retelling of Enki and Enlil among the Sumerian text. Essentially that you even have tablets that show them doing some kind of scientific work on the human race. Some will say what had happened is originally Jehovah and their commanders and these aliens came here, perhaps from Nibiru, the 12th planet, that comes around every so many thousands of years, and on its last cycle coming through, creating a lot of chaos, resulting in the flood. But prior to it coming to that, they came here from that planet, and they needed resources from this planet, and so they took from the mud of the earth, and they formed a human, and then they couldn't quite figure out how to get it to move, and so they breathed in the breath of life. But then they took out a lot of their intellect from their brain and put in blocks so that man wouldn't remember their history. And so originally it was only going to be men that were to be created, an Adam race. And this men were to mine precious minerals, particularly gold being one of the most important to the atmosphere of Jehovah's planet. But what Jehovah came to see is that the Adam race were dissatisfied and also were rebellious. They couldn't be subdued. And so this is what you have. The spirit in them was being moved to rebel against this alien species. And then, of course, that's when they decided to create the female, to keep that Adam subdued and to be subjugated to some responsibility or accountability to a family. So created the cycle of birth. And of course there were factions that disagreed with this. But one of those that, of course, agreed on this was the one that proposed this in the first place, and that was Jehovah. I don't remember if it's Enlil or it was Enki, but one of them, the two brothers, one disagreed and the other was for it. Supposedly the one that was against it, some argue, was Christ, and the one was for is Jehovah. Now, that's just one telling of that, and there's many books out there on it if you're interested in that topic. And then we have, of course, Christ coming to the garden and saying, you don't have to follow this Jehovah. You're free. You were meant to be eternal. In fact, you have within you the capacity to supersede even their powers because of your unique species, which was to naturally evolve. Now, at that time, it was thought that perhaps that race of being was created to create culture and to rule over the Gentiles, which were evolving at a natural pace. So the Gentiles were not considered to be a threat, mainly because they had taken and formed a leader of the Gentiles, which was to be the Hebrew race. And then, of course, the Hebrew race would rule over the Gentiles, and the Jehovah God would rule over the Hebrew. And that's the structure that's created. And then, of course, ruling over Jehovah would be the demiurge that creates this kind of hierarchical structure in all planetary systems. And so that's one theory. If you want to believe that way, that's perfectly fine. That's not as important as understanding that Christ brought back this understanding of man's capacity to have power, self-empowerment, and to overcome whatever these beings are, these entities are, that have enslaved mankind to a society of labor and consumption and constantly being attached to distractions, suffering, terror, death, war, and mayhem. So this is the significance of Adam being split. There are other people that have written books about there being a great war on earth and that man suffers from some type of schizophrenic mental post-traumatic syndrome. And there's actually some evidence of that in different findings in rocks and of charred materials that obviously very heated and not even close to any volcanoes, and materials that you would find in nuclear waste in different parts of the Middle East and other parts of the Pacific Ocean, so forth and so on. So some call this place Lemur, Atlantis. But whatever it is, there is clearly within the subconscious mind of the human race this understanding that there was a former civilization that existed long ago. And this is in all cultures that shared. And the idea that there were visitations from the sky and interchange and enterprise. So these are not new inventions. This idea that we can write books about Star Wars or Star Trek, Doctor Who, whatever, isn't something that just came up all of a sudden in the last 50 to 100 years. This was already within us to write about, you see. This was something that was like a recollection of a time past. So this is important as a backdrop to understand Genesis chapter 1, verse 1 and 2. So I bring forth these little pieces so that we can build on this as we continue to delve into the Gnostic text. And eventually we'll go into the canonical text and we'll have a new understanding of these texts. Now let's build on this Adam's soul in the next section. It says Jesus at the Jordan. Now what's significant about Jesus being at the Jordan River? Of course, Jesus had his baptism there, but also it was the river in which the Israelites had escaped the Egyptians. Passing over the Jordan River was the promised land. Anything west of the Jordan River was considered the promised land. And so in that sense, they found their salvation. They had found their promised land. And so too Christ represents the promised land. He's the salvation. He's the path to paradise. So Jesus revealed himself at the Jordan River as the fullness of heaven's kingdom. So that's its significance. Now, some will say that this is another example of how Jesus is making an implied statement that the Old Testament God is the God that he worships. Otherwise, why would he follow through on these symbolic gestures or these parallel enactments? When Christ very much explained the reason he's doing this is so that you may believe. He denounced the God of the Old Testament on many occasions during his ministry on earth. But he also followed through in all the rituals, whatever the myth was, whether it was Hindu and the belief in reincarnation or karma through you reap what you sow, through having baptism in the River Jordan as the Hebrews did at the time, so forth and so on. This is the way not necessarily the Jewish people did at the time or the Israelites, but rather reenacting the passing of the Israelites across the Jordan River, experiencing a type of baptism, a renewal of spirit, going from the old world into the new promised land. So Christ did all of this in his 3 years of ministry in a way in which it fulfilled all the laws and prophecies so that man would be more able to accept him and embrace him and have faith that he is in fact the Messiah, the Christ. He's the one, so-called in the Matrix, Neo, he's the one, you see, Jesus at the Jordan. And so the one conceived before all was conceived again. So what does it mean? It says it was conceived again because again, he's duplicating the rebirth. And when he talks to Nicodemus, he says, you cannot be saved unless you're born again. Well, of course, he was conceived once in the womb of Mary, and then the second time is conceived by the baptism. The one anointed before was anointed again. The one redeemed others. So here is an example of how redemption has nothing to do with sins. Otherwise, you have to say that Christ is being redeemed here because of sin. Christ is not being redeemed because of sin. The redemption is Christ accepting his worthiness to receive the free gift of eternal life. Just like I explained many times, much like a coupon that you redeem for free to get your meal. You cut out the coupon out of the newspaper and you go to the local restaurant and you hand over the coupon and you get a free meal. This is what redemption is. It has nothing to do with feeling guilty and shameful and wretched. Even Christ was redeemed. As it says, the one redeemed others. They opened the pathway to fullness, heaven's kingdom, within all of us. In the next section, the mystery of the virgin birth. It is necessary to utter a mystery, and the mystery here is the virgin birth, what the Catholic Church calls the Immaculate Conception. The Father of all united with the Virgin who came down. So it's first important to understand the Father of all, of course, is the Bythos, the will of the Father moving in the emanation. Is the emanation of all things. And the Virgin here who came down is the Sophia, The virgin spirit is the pure will of the Father, coming in the expression of Sophia, the wisdom, and fire shone on him, and the fire shining is from the Christ. On that day, that one revealed the great bridal chamber. So that means that it was that moment that the marriage of Sophia and the Christ was consummated. It had made its formal merging. It was married now because it had fulfilled its purpose. The aeon of Sophia and the Christ fulfilled itself in the body of Mary. And Mary, again, is the sea of understanding. It's the mirage of this flesh world, the illusion, Maya. And in this way, his body came into being. This is how creation or emanation is brought through, or conception. It's brought through intention. The Father's will intends to marry the Sophia and the Christ. And so they're married, and then it brings forth the Jesus man. On that day he came forth from the bridal chamber as one born of a bridegroom and a bride. The bridegroom and the bride here is Sophia, Christ, and then Jesus Christ, the Christ and the Sophia. Jesus established all within it, and it is fitting for each of the disciples to enter into his rest. So this means enter into his peace, into his repose, into his blessedness, into his graciousness, meaning that it's fitting that everyone that's a disciple of Christ, of the Jesus, they too will find rest, as Christ did. The next section, the births of Adam and Christ. Adam came from two virgins, the Spirit and the virgin earth. So the Spirit is the Spirit of the Mother Father, which is the gnosis and the wisdom, and the virgin earth is the flesh form. That's the flesh form that Philip talks about, the luminescent water light that is the perfect man. The first man that was created was birthed as a perfect man, the first Adam. Christ was born of a virgin to correct the fall that occurred in the beginning. And the fall here that's being referred to is not eating of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, but the fall is the enticement into this realm, the matrix, the kanoma, the spirits that come to this realm, each one of us coming to this realm, the corrupt realm. That's the fall. The fall occurred before the tree of knowledge of good and evil was partaken from. Death was introduced prior to that. You see, the Garden of Eden was merely a place to keep people in a sleep and a stupor, to keep them distracted by pleasurable things. But it also was a place of control. You can have this, but you can't have that, you see. It was a place to create division in the mind of man and women at the beginning. You can have this, but not that. That's the very seed of division in the beginning. You need not do anything else. You merely only need to make that statement. You can do this, but not that. And why would man rebel naturally from that? Because man and women were created to be free from the beginning, and everything was accessible to man. Nothing was forbidden. God had created us as independent free agents. We had good within us to do good. There was no evil intent. But then it was the demiurge that planted a seed of division by saying merely this: you can have of this all the good things, he called it, but of the two things in the midst of the garden you may not partake of. The demiurge knew that this was going to create a rebellious nature. And so, of course, you know the rest of the story there. So the two trees in the paradise. There are two trees growing in the paradise. One produces animals and the other produces people. We had talked prior, and I believe it was in the Gospel of Truth, about there being the tree of good and evil. And then there's the tree of knowledge of good and evil. These are two different trees. The tree of good and evil is all the other trees that the Jehovah God permitted Adam and Eve to partake of, because they were trees that would lead to death, you see. But the tree of knowledge of good and evil and the tree of life, those were not permitted. The tree of knowledge of good and evil, that would have woken up within mankind the understanding of sin, you see. And why is that? And we'll get to that in a second. And it says one produces animals and the other produces people. Animals being that spiritual self that is not tamed, that is asleep, doesn't have gnosis, it's ignorant. It has a faint glimmering of awareness, intellect, but not much more than that. But of course, people is superior to that, is able to have much more awareness. And it continues, and he became an animal and brought forth animals. As a result, Adam's children worship animals. What does it mean, worship animals? Well, we sacrifice animals, and we eat animals. We consume animals. Animals is everything that we are. We live our lives around festivals of animals, 3 meals a day around animals. The tree whose fruit he ate is the tree of knowledge. And because of this, sins increased. So again, when Adam and Eve partook of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, they realized the intent of the demiurge, and this created within them a rebellious nature. And they begin to partake of all things. Because when you have an understanding of what everything is, you want to consume of that bodily knowledge, because everything is a body of knowledge. The animals running around, the trees, they all are for only one reason, and that is they contain knowledge. And man partakes of them because they want to consume knowledge. They don't know this fact. They think it's because of the pleasure or whatnot. This is why when we talk, when in the canonical text it talks about Adam came to know Eve, it was about sex, intercourse. And so too, when we consume of the flesh of any sort in any arrangement, this is a type of intercourse. It's a way of knowing something intimately. How much more intimate is it than to consume of the flesh of another animal? That is very intimate, is it not? And thus, because of this, sins increased. And why did it increase is because we are what we eat. We consumed of that thing that is less aware of than us, and thus we become less aware, and we go to sleep. This tree of knowledge is of the body of all things. That's the tree of knowledge of good and evil that he partook of. If he had eaten the fruit of the other tree, the fruit of the tree of life, which produces people, gods would worship people. So this is the trickery, you see. The demiurge creates within Adam and Eve a desire to rebel against Jehovah. And so he knows by doing this, they're going to eat of the tree of knowledge. It's like saying to a little kid, don't eat the cookies in the kitchen. If you want to get your child to eat a cookie, all you need to do is tell them there's a cookie in the kitchen and don't eat it. And at the age of 3 or 4, the child won't know any different. They might think you're mean. In fact, now you've told them of the cookie, and they now also want to rebel against you being so ugly to them. Because all they know is the cookie's good. Why would you be so bad as to stand in the way of something good? So this is what the demiurge, this is how crafty he is, you see. And so then Adam and Eve partake of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Now, is there anything intrinsically wrong with the tree of knowledge of good and evil? No, there isn't. However, mankind was not capable at that point of handling, consuming of this knowledge, because they did not have of the tree of life. So this is talking about the will to consume all things, but nothing to tame it. If you create death, you're going to lead to death. It's going to lead you down the path of death. And so you must have the tree of life so that you no longer need to consume of the flesh, because that tree of life will sustain you. And then you only need to feed on knowledge, not on the flesh, because you're looking to find life through the death of the flesh. That's your sustenance, you see. It becomes your sustenance. So the tree of knowledge in and of itself is not an evil thing, but without the tree of life, it becomes a thing that leads to death, you see, because man cannot have access to the tree of knowledge of good and evil, but through flesh, without the tree of life. The tree of life provides you sustenance, a means by which you can have access to the tree of knowledge of good and evil without eating of the flesh, you see. It's the key. So the tree of life is the Christ. The tree of knowledge is the Sophia. And we'll get to understand this more deeply later, but it says gods would have worshipped people. And this is what the demiurge knew, and the archons knew this as well, that they had to stop mankind, because there was within man this capacity that superseded even the demiurge. They did not want that. As in paradise, God created people that people might create God. This is very important to understand, because what it's saying is that originally God created man in all of our different forms so that we each would be a part of God, so that that puzzle piece would make up our understanding of God as a whole. That was the original intention. So also in this world, people make gods and worship what they have created. Now, originally, it was not intended for man to worship God, but rather it was for man to be God, and that was it. And we were to be the emanation of God, and therefore the body of God. That was the original intention. But it was corrupted, of course. And now man makes lowercase gods, and then they worship them. It would be more fitting for gods to worship people. So it would be more fitting that we just accept ourselves and to reverence ourselves and to lift ourselves up in our worthiness and to see that we are at the level of God, you see, that we're worthy to receive all the goodness. You know, what does a god do? A god is that person that lies down and people bring him fruits and water and fans him from the heat. Well, this is the way it was intended. We were to be royal from the beginning, but this was not going to be something that the demiurge would want for us. So anyway, that's what we have here. Then we move on to the next section entitled Accomplishments. It builds on this by talking about the accomplishments. The truth is, a person's accomplishments depend on that person's abilities. So in other words, accomplishments has nothing to do with your rank, has nothing to do with how much money you get or how big of a house you buy or how fast you run run, but it depends upon your abilities. And for this reason, we refer to accomplishments as abilities. So abilities are things that accompany you. And this is the same thing we used before when we talked about Mary Magdalene was a companion to Christ. It stems from the word company, to accompany someone. And also the word accomplishment comes from that same word. Accomplishment comes from accompany. And it's the state of accompanying something. So we already are in the company of our abilities from the very beginning. It's already born in us. It's not something you can change. You can't change that. Those abilities are natural to you and unique to you. The only thing you can do is either let them go to waste or you can cultivate them. And you can't fight against this truth that's in you, that's unique to you. It is the very thing that's going to bring you all the good that you could possibly ever achieve in a lifetime, in many, many lifetimes, for all of eternity. Because it's a unique part of God, you see. You are a unique part of God. No one else is like you. And you're just as important as any other unique part of God that millions and billions of other people have, you see. And so you have unique abilities. That's what it's saying. Truth is, a person's accomplishment depend on that person's abilities. And for this reason, we refer to accomplishments as abilities or accompaniments, things that we come with already, that accompany us upon birth. Among such accomplishments are a person's children. They come into being from a time of rest. So it isn't you that's responsible for the children come into this world, but rather it is that it's already in you for this to come about. And so this is an accomplishment. You see how easy it is to have children? It's even pleasurable often, and yet these children come with no work, unless you want to call intercourse work. But this is what it's saying, from a time of rest. Now, one's abilities come to expression in what one accomplishes, and rest is clearly found in children. So this is talking about the innocence. It's not just talking about progeny. You will find this also applies to the image of children, which is the image of innocence, the image of being free and unrestrained. These are the people made after the image, who accomplish things about their strength and bring forth children through rest. And this is also talking about how children come about in the pleroma. It doesn't come through the birth canal. It doesn't come through flesh, but it comes through when you and your consort have a spiritual experience, and then light water comes forth naturally, and that child is then birthed. This is what you so desire. It will come about in the pleroma. There'll be no birthing process or pain that requires some type of anesthesia. All right, the next section, slave and free. In this world, slaves serve the free. In heaven's kingdom, the free will serve the slaves, and attendants of the bridal chamber will serve the wedding guests. So in this world, obviously, we are slaves to the corporate machine, and we serve those on the top that have billions of dollars that spend most of the time taking vacations here and there and buying all kinds of things. But in the pleroma, the free will serve the slaves. What does it mean here is that in the pleroma, every one of us will be free. And so we will be serving each other. We were formerly slaves, now we're free. And the attendants of the bridal chamber will serve the wedding guests. The attendants of the bridal chamber have only one name, and that is rest. When they are together, they need no other form, for they are in contemplation, perception. They are superior among those, the glories of glories. So this is just simply saying that everyone is free, including the slaves, and we're all serving each other. And now I'm going to close this off in the last two sections, because we open this up with the baptism, Jesus entering into the Jordan. Jesus going down into the water. It was necessary for Jesus to go down into the water in order to perfect and purify it. So also those who are baptized in his name are perfected. For he said, thus shall we perfect all righteousness. Now this is not saying that you have to go and actually do a physical ceremony of baptism. It's talking about being baptized through the Christ. How do you get baptized from the Christ? Is simply receiving the understanding of the gnosis and the wisdom. That's it. So you don't have to do anything else except to commit yourself faithfully to that path of gnosis, to grow that gnosis and reorient your understanding of the universe and your purpose, and to start to intend yourself to map out your operating system, your brain and your body to line up with the eternal, and to understand that you have accepted that when you ready to go back to Pleroma on your last day here in the flesh form, that you're ready to come back up from the water, back into the Pleroma, in this murky realm, from this murky realm. That's the baptism. Last section, resurrection baptism. People who say they will first die and then arise are wrong. If they do not receive the resurrection first while they are alive, they will receive nothing when they die. So in other words, just as Christ's spirit had gone first, and then his body died, the Jesus man died, this also would be the way in which you will know if you have actually accepted yourself back into the Pleroma, or the holy realms. And when you die, you'll see your body be left behind. Now those that die and are ready to be reincarnated, those are the ones that will not see their body. They'll just go back into amnesia. They'll just die, and then they'll come back. Their next moment of awareness will be in their new body, physical body in this plane. They'll just go back into that place of darkness where the demiurge controls the souls. And this is nothing to be afraid about, because this is just you simply saying that I want to experience more in this realm, and I have attachments here, and that's perfectly okay. It's all on your timetable. There's no pressure. If they do not receive the resurrection first, they are alive. They will receive nothing when they die. So it is said of baptism, great is baptism, for it, if people receive it, they will live. In other words, you accept that you are going through a sacrament, a process of being in this realm, and that you're going to go back. That you accept you were there before, that's your original home, and you're going to go back. And you're going to align yourself to those things and start to detach yourself from the needs of this world. And that becomes your purpose, you see. And then you start walking the way of Christ, and you focus on his teachings and how to love others, your neighbors, love yourself, not judge people, give if you can, feed the sick, the hungry. These are the things he asks you to do, you see. And you shouldn't force yourself to do them, but you'll be wanting to do them. You'll feel moved to do them. Do them only when you feel moved to do them. And more importantly, those are not going to cause you to go to the Pleroma. Those aren't things that are going to cause you to go to Pleroma. But rather, it is that practicing these things will begin to help you to detach from the cares of this world. Because in order for you to do these things, you have to be able to let go of certain things. For example, learning how to sacrifice your money or your time or your energy. These are all not what's going to make you get back into heaven. It's not like you're working yourself back into the Pleroma, but rather it's practicing in you the capacity to detach from the cares of this world. So you're giving away your money, you're doing this, you're doing that. You're practicing giving away things of this world. You no longer make them your security blanket. So you don't trust in the world, the things of this world, but you trust in the Father, Mother, and you trust that there is life after death. You trust that you're eternal, and so you have no cares in terms of you're not hapless or you're careless, but rather you don't have fear and terror, and death no longer has a sting on you. You're ready, not that you're hastening it or you're causing your death to come quickly. You want to fulfill your mission here, however long that is, to live a long and prosperous life as God asks you to do. But as you live that life, you grow in your gnosis and your wisdom and your maturity and your ascending in the spirit. That becomes your goal. And you start to live a more natural life whereby you don't need to attach to the things of this world. One way to do that is to get to a place where you can find peace away from the maddening crowd, but you are sufficient and to live on the things that are needed, the basics, the food, the shelter, have your place, and then you can go out into the world and you can be part of healing and then come back to your place of peace. And that's what I would recommend you do, find that place of peace and not necessarily have to get a big mansion or lots of cars and lots of social networking and being famous or popular or important in terms of some type of structure, like you're an officer or something like that. This is the mechanisms of the world, the cares of this world, you see. But rather to find your independent, your self-reliance. But also don't become so detached that you're not practicing the natural flow of the in and out of the river flowing, the waters of life. So that you have to get out and engage to heal people. And healing isn't just putting your hands on them and say, okay, you're healed. But healing is being someone who brings hope to people through a smile, through encouraging words, through enlightenment, sharing gnosis, the good news, doing a soup kitchen, Habitat for Humanity. Now again, these are not things that are going to work yourself into heaven, but they're means in which you can practice to tame your flesh-oriented self. So that you start to reorient your priorities and you begin to find your spirit loosening up and lightening up, and you begin to glow as a person because you've found self-sufficiency and self-reliance. And you have the confidence in you. And the self-reliance comes from an understanding that truth is found in the most natural place of earth. It's the body of Sophia. It's the wisdom. So you feed off of that truth. And you try to lower your contribution to suffering and death as much as possible. Your so-called blueprint on this planet. And so you live as natural of a life as you can, and as close to nature as possible, and away from the maddening crowd. And you create that oasis, but you don't isolate yourself, because by doing that, you're not able to but practice one part of the spiritual self, which is the meditating part. But then you don't have the communion part. And again, these are not required, but they certainly go a long way to practicing, helping you to transcend the spiritual self. And by transcending your spiritual self, you begin to lose your fear of death. You begin to lose your fear of this distraction of this world that's constantly trying to instill fear and terror in you. And also you become a source of hope, and you find strength through that, and you provide strength, and you begin to lose your fear of even death and losing this physical life, because you have the faith that there is more. And so that's our understanding of the resurrection and accepting of the baptism. This process is here to help you purify your intention. That's the baptism. And when you finally purify that intention, and not to the place of perfection, because it is rare that we could reach the level of Christ in one lifetime, but to get as close as we can to it, that's the baptism. And to recognize that that dunking process, that purification process, is there to help you detach from this realm. And then you find the resurrection. All right, hopefully that's clear. If you have any questions on any of that, feel free to ask me, and I'll try to clarify it for you further. All right, with that, we'll talk again soon. Bye.